Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our ID Masterclass for August. So our session today, we're going to talk about keeping the ID alive. So one of the things we've said just recently, there's been a lot of, the last 3 years in our webinars, we've spent time talking about understanding ID and helping people gain a better awareness of what the different drives mean, what the combinations mean, the intensities, and the way it applies in various situations in our lives. One of the requests that's come through is can we pivot a little bit more to talk about how we use ID, how we use it personally, how we use it in teams, how we use it as leaders, how we use it in relationships, and so on. So what we're doing in the month of August, we have a different theme for every month. We're focusing on how you can use it in teams and specifically how you keep it alive in teams. So that's what we're going to dig into in today's class as well, and do it with a little more nuance than what we did a couple of weeks ago with our more broader Living in Stride webinar. So we will get into that in a minute, but we always start the masterclass, given that this is the people that really want to get into the nuances of ID, by first checking in on how we are doing and whether we're in stride or not. Because our number one strategy for dealing with anything, dealing with conflict, making your best decisions, how you communicate effectively, whatever it might be, is first get in stride. So the best you is showing up. So let's just check in with that. For those of you who might be new, we have a little model here, which I'll quickly show you. We call it our peak performance indicator. Is this coming up on the screen now?
Yep.
Great. Thanks, Cliff. So this is just a way of getting a mental picture of what we mean by being in stride. So that green arrow in the middle of the page is you traveling life on that straight line, and that's you being in stride, being true to yourself. Some people talk about being in flow, but that's you thriving. We've for years talked about fulfillment. More recently, I've had people use the word joy a little more than maybe it's me just hearing it differently. But there's a joy that just is really lightening and enlightening when you are really in stride. But there are forces in life, and you can see here, whether it's society branding you the minute you were born as, male or female, or these days before you're born, whether it's your family raising you a certain way because, of your age, your gender, where you're at with your schooling, whatever it might be, there are forces that continuously pull us out of stride, not because they're trying to, interfere with our life. They're actually trying to raise us in a way that fits life, fits being male, fits being female, fits being a student, but that doesn't mean that it fits you. And when it pulls you out of stride, not only do you miss out on achieving all these things at the top of the chart, but you start to experience forms of stress and distress. And one of the things is, if you look at this yellow box here, not only does it impact performance and your stress and therefore your health, but it also affects the way you show up. And for those of you who really care about influencing and leadership and creating the fellowship that makes a difference in the world, being able to speak your truth, being visible, you have people talk about, I finally feel seen. So having that courage and that confidence and that clarity around what you stand for, and then being willing to speak that truth in whatever, authentic, real conversation you encounter day by day, that occurs best when you come from a place of being in stride. So we just asked the question on a scale of 0 to 10, if 10 is thriving on this green arrow and a 1 out of 10 is way out here to the left or way out to the right, what's the number or the expression that comes up for you today? And I just ask you to maybe put it in the chat, because that's where we can see, quickly see everyone's responses. And then I'm just going to pause to create the space just for anyone that might want to comment on their number or the collectives. And I have to think about mine. Put mine in. All right, so you can see we've got several 9s, 8s and 7s, a 6. So has anyone got something going on that they would like to either comment on and just share the context, or get some help from the team? And it might even be, if you're a 9 today and that's, you've had to work to get there, is there something about where you're at that you'd like to share, that like what got you there, that has been a breakthrough that you want to share with the team? So I'll stop there in case anyone wants to comment. Be aware that you might be on mute, so you have to take yourself off mute to comment.
Good evening. I'm Takala Hood, and I am about a 6 today. Let's see, what do I have going on? I'm in a new org at work and trying to navigate in a new org. And then I just, as of a week ago, became an empty nester. My last son is gone to college. And it's a celebratory time, but I'm also like getting used to being at home alone with my husband. And so there's a lot of new and uncertainties and unknowns. So I'm a 6.
Thank you for sharing, Takala. Where are you calling in from?
I'm actually in North Carolina.
Okay. Well, welcome. Thanks for dialing in. So it's interesting, isn't it? Like these things happen. They're pretty normal, regular life events, albeit they're not every day that you become an empty nester, but it's not like they're unique to you. And they, for some people, can be really turbulent. For others, they're exciting. It can be the same thing. It all depends on how we frame it. Can you see with your ID what would turn it, the same situation you're in today, new role, changes going on personally, what would make you feel like you're more of a 9? You know, if you were really much more in stride, what would you need that's not there today?
I think it's like knowledge, like knowing some things, just knowing what's really going on, like knowing the end result or knowing the path that I'm going. I think that's what I'm just kind of at odds with, and just reinventing myself. So there's some uncertainty there, and just knowing that I'm going in the right direction.
Can I ask, is there an authenticator on the call that maybe has been in the same situation as Takala, can really empathize with what she's going through and can see if you either went through it differently, like maybe you're an 8 or 9, but what would you say you did, or what's a need that you can see would make the difference and get your score up?
Nope, just one of those life transitions that personally as a mother, I did not like.
I have to say I expected it to be like super freeing and that kind of thing. And then I realized I had like all this time, right? And I had, as an authenticator, I had to find something to do. I was like, I'm now going to go to the gym. I'm now going, like all those things that I was like, oh, I can't do that because, so I had to make myself some tasks around not just sitting around.
Right.
Yeah, that's what we do, but it does take a little bit of time before you're really going, whoa, this is fun. It's a little something. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to create things to do too. And it was really, the gift is now I have the time to do these other things. So I laid out a list of things that I was going to be doing that I didn't have a chance to do before, which helped me get through it.
So what I'm hearing from you guys is, firstly, you need to be doing, which we would say is true. So Takala, what happens is there's always the emotion. It's like, grieving a loss. If someone passes away, I remember when my parents passed away that was close to each other. I mean, there was the enormous emotional loss. But I remember still, because of the awareness of my ID, I remember this really weird feeling of still feeling like, yeah, but I can do that in stride. And we did do it in stride. Like I was surrounded, I'm one of 6 kids, and luckily we're all still really close. But there was actually a lot of really good times there that I felt very in stride going through that. And it was a really weird experience to have the emotion on the one hand, and yet in another way, I felt like I was doing it in stride, or maybe said differently, I was doing it to the best of my ability that way, but there was a sense of fulfillment from doing it in stride. And so when I hear, for any of us, we can have challenges that occur in our lives. And then the question is not how far, knowing ID, instead of wandering way off to the left or way off to the right, we can maybe not go too far off. We might go from a 9 down to a 7 or something, and or to a 6, but be able to get back up relatively quickly. And so when you're hearing the guys talk about having something to do, I think that's one thing. But the other one I'd call out is being useful. Authenticators always make it really clear. I need to help. I need to feel like what I'm doing matters and feel really useful. And although that maybe could come automatically when you've got the kids at home and you just
Right.
do things, now if you know that's a need, then you can go, okay, what can I do that's not just doing, but it's really useful, and you feel that there's that meaning and purpose back in what you can do day by day.
Yeah, Paul, I was gonna say something like that. Basically, if you're feeling that, then they're going, do they know? Every once in a while, it's okay to call and go, man, I can't believe how much I'm missing you. You've been such a pain in the butt, but now I really miss you. That kind of, just have some fun with it. And let them let you know. When I finally said that to my daughter, she goes, I thought you didn't want to talk to me. Why have you been calling? And I said, I'm giving you space. She goes, well, don't give me so much damn space, So let them be involved in your missing, and make it real for them and you, and you'll feel less out of control, I think.
I'm a little farther down the line. I'm getting ready for retirement, and I'll tell you what, if we had a project just end. We're in transition right now, and I went part-time because I want to practice retirement. And you talking about the need, it is a thing for me. It's a driving force. It's like, okay, what am I going to do with this day? What am I doing? Okay, so what I've learned from practicing being part-time is that my mornings are more leisurely. I get to go out for a bike ride. I get to go for a walk. I get to have a little more relaxing morning. But in the afternoon, I'm ready to go to work. So I'm liking the part-time thing. I told them I was practicing retirement. So I'm hoping that they'll let me, as I see how this works, it might be nice to be able to be part-time, instead of having to go find a new thing to do in the afternoon.
So Tina, you raised a really good point. I mean, you've got a different ID to someone like Takala, quite a different ID. So what you raise as a strong completer and avoid improvise, who needs plans, and change can be brutal for people with your ID. And so I love this idea of practicing retirement, and like transitioning in that way. So it's not an abrupt change of, Friday I'm working, Monday I'm retired, but you get the chance to like have a foot in both camps and sort of transition so that it's smoother and it's not as abrupt. I think that's a nice strategy that others on the call that are wired similarly can probably go, oh, I'll keep that in mind,
Yeah, it's good. And of course, my manager, he thought, oh my gosh, if you're going to retire, you'll just drink all afternoon or something. Because he wasn't sure how I would handle it. So it's good to be practicing.
Well, maybe practice that. So I want to come back to one last point I thought of, Takala, for you that might help. So we talked about doing and then being useful. But the other one, and you sort of referred to this when you said more knowledge. And so you use the word knowledge, but I want to call this out because we're here this is the masterclass, and we're here for the nuances of ID. And so people use words, but depending on what their ID is, the words might mean a different thing. And so when you said knowledge, I heard knowledge. But when I saw your ID, Takala, I converted the word knowledge to picture, because what an authenticator needs to be really like on their game and back on that green center line in stride. They need a clear picture of where are they going to, what does life look like. Now, you might use the word knowledge, and someone could almost dismiss you and say, what do you mean knowledge? You're an expert on everything. You know this, you know that, because we react to the word. But if we know someone's ID and we can translate it to go, oh, what would they mean by knowledge? What would they mean by challenge? What would they mean by busy? What would they mean by pressure? And then we can often get that nuance that goes, oh, okay, so when you say knowledge, do you mean a clear picture? So I'm asking you, is that what you would mean, having a clearer picture of what is life going to be like now that these changes have occurred?
Absolutely. You hit it. You nailed it.
Right. And so I didn't want to miss that because of the what this class represents. But even you just knowing now that when I say knowledge, I mean picture, and go off and do that. Like it could be as simple as it's that concept of putting a vision board together. You know, if you just went and got some magazines, whatever, and put a vision board together of, okay, what is life going to be like now that these things have occurred? How do I want that to be? What are the pictures that look like the life I want? And you put that together, the clarity that brings you and the difference that clarity makes, I should say, is incredible. And you could go from being a 6 today and you do that tomorrow morning, and by lunchtime you go, oh my God, I'm feel totally back in stride now. I've got that clear picture, you know, and my number today would be like a 9, for example. So it's the power of knowing your specific needs and then being able to proactively address them.
And just one additional thing to call it, because I heard you also say you're in a new organization, and probably you don't have, as Paul had mentioned, that clear picture of what your expectations are of you or of your team.
Right.
Trying to get to know your new leader, all of that, all of those things. So I think not only that vision board, but also getting up on a whiteboard, even with your team, and just saying, here's where we are today. Where do we think we need to be tomorrow in this new organization would help you, and I think your team, feel more connected.
Great call,
Patricia. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else want to comment on their number? And thanks to Carla. I'm really glad. I could see when you said the 6, I didn't want to, you know, pull you out, but I'm really glad that you commented. And because not only do those things help you, but I'm sure there are other people on the call that immediately helps as well. So thank you for doing that. Anyone else want to comment on where they're at today in terms of being in stride, or maybe even a little out of stride? Or any questions about it?
I wouldn't call myself out of stride, but I think Patricia just gave me a tip, like that was the thing I needed. So thanks, Patricia. I was like, wait, I think I need that right now too.
And Cliff, what are you referring to?
Oh, just in general, just you know, just general household stuff that I'm trying to take care of.
Okay. But do you mean clearer picture? Is that what you're?
Yeah. It's like I don't have a clear picture of what I need to be doing here, and that's kind of like just putting me a little off. Yeah,
and I did notice that. I mean, so what I would call out about that is I noticed you as a 7, and I'd say that's a little down for what I often see as.
I know, I'm so effervescent.
Yeah, and so for those who are new to this, a 7 is often perceived as a good score, and it's an okay score. It means you're sort of doing and things are going okay. But if you want to be thriving and exude that sense of vitality that starts to vibrate energy for the benefit of others around you as well, and actually improve your influence on people, what we have found is that kicks in from an 8. And of course, you know, people say, yeah, but an 8 for you might be a 7 for someone else. I'm like, okay, let's not get too sort of surgical about it. I mean, I'm just making the point that don't be complacent at a 7. And frankly, even at an 8, don't be complacent and think that a 9 is just like winning the lottery and it happens just to a few people. It really is possible to live your life at a 9 very consistently. The more you're aware, first of all, and then the more you intentionally attack that and sort of go, well, you know, do I design my day so that I'm in that space? What do I need? What's missing to get from an 8 to a 9? The difference, what we have found is the difference between a 6 and an 8 is the equivalent of doubling productivity. It's not just a bit of a difference. And I dare say, and I haven't got the same confidence as I haven't had the same feedback about going from an 8 to a 9, but I know it's an exponential improvement. So it's very possible that just like a 6 to an 8 is a doubling, probably from an 8 to a 9 is a doubling, you know? So I'd say to you, be aware that it's firstly possible for every ID to be at a 9. And if you want to get, you know, the best out of your life for yourself and for those around you, think about the nuances of what's missing for you to get to that space. All right. So let's move on to the topic for today. So this was the chart we put up last week I'm just putting this up to remind you of the various things that we have found people do to keep the ID alive in their team. And I'm just forewarning you as I quickly go through this, I'm going to come to this one over here, number 6, and have you share just some examples of stories that you maybe use to keep yourself focused on ID, keep it relevant in your life and in your mind, whether they happened yesterday or whether it's something like a significant story from several months ago or the very first impact ID had on you. I'm not sure what it might be that you want to share, but I think it'd be really valuable for people to share it. And then as you share your story, we'll listen for how your ID plays into that story and we'll unpack that with you. Okay, so, but a quick reminder here, there may be other things people do. And if you can see something that you do in your team or in your family to keep ID alive, please feel free to call it out. But this basically summarizes what we discussed last time and what people shared. So if you're writing emails, having it on your email signature, as virtually everyone in our team does, and I've noticed some of our clients start doing now as well, which is really cool. When you have your WebEx meetings, like you can see here on our call, see everyone's got their IDs on. So as an example, before, if Takala had not put her ID next to her name and we were just having that conversation, I wouldn't have known to interpret the word knowledge to mean picture, and that's the power of having it in your name. And even if you don't understand it that well, if you at least see that someone's ID is different to yours, then you can just ask them, so Takala, what did you mean by knowledge? I just know you might mean it differently to how I'm hearing it because we're so different ID-wise. And then it gives the person the space to speak. You can see team sharing. So I remember Brenda, one of our clients, I'm not sure if Brenda's on the call today, talking last time about they just make it a point in their weekly staff meetings that somebody shares a story, something they've either learnt from their ID or what they've seen around the ID or just a story that they have. And that helps keep it alive in their team. Doing the PPI check-in, so that pulse check that we just did as a team here, this is one of the most profound things that teams do. Leaders, like, they froth at this particular exercise because it just helps them get like a temperature check on how well is the team doing overall, where are my outliers, where are the people that may be struggling a little out of stride that I can help a little bit, where are the people that are really shining, where are the people that look like they're shining, but maybe they're not because they've just indicated a score that's a lower score than what I was expecting. And it's the conversation that particular exercise provokes. I mean, we just made it very quick because it's just a piece of our webinar today. But in a team meeting, that exercise, by the time you go around and various people in the team comment, this often can be like a 45-minute conversation, but a profound conversation in the team. So I highly recommend that. Having a mapping of your team, however you might want to do that. I just put this here as one example of a visual mapping of the IDs within a team. And then there's, getting in stride, just making sure you are, and what do you do to do that? Sharing various bullets off the platform, which when we go live with our new platform the 1st of September, you're going to see even more collateral that you can share. And just doing that, whether it's by email or by voice, is another way for you to keep things alive in the team. Does anyone have any questions or comments that you want to just ask or share off of this slide before we get into stories? Anything additional? Is there something that you do that's maybe different to this that helps you keep it alive that you want to share?
And Paul, I think you said this or alluded to it, where it says the team sharings, ID learnings, and sharing collaboration tips. What I see a lot of teams do are encourage people to, like, if you're going to have a meeting, I'm having a meeting with you this afternoon, Paul, I'll look your ID up, I'll get the collaboration bullet points, I'll get some information on how to interact with you more effectively. So I think that's a really good way to encourage teams to keep it alive, is to have, in a meeting, say, hey, we have a big, presentation coming up with XYZ, let's look them up and see what we need to do.
Great point. And I've got to say that just recently, I feel like I don't know why, but I feel like I'm getting that more people are using that part of the platform. I just feel like I'm getting a lot more feedback recently about people.
I have as well.
And just even yesterday, I had a leader on a call, and he said to the whole team, guys, you know, make sure you do this. I do this all the time. And I thought, wow, I had no idea that he did. But I found it interesting that the person on the call, there were about 8 people on the call, the person on the call that was exuding, you know, the most in strideness, as it were, was that particular person. And I thought, isn't that interesting that, you know, he's really made a point of learning about this for himself and then using it with others. And his whole energy and his presence, and he was really there for others. It wasn't as much about him. It was about what he could do for others. And I just thought his whole focus has pivoted and was a really great example to everyone else on the call. And he was doing exactly what you talked about, Patricia, of, you know, looking up people and being more aware of them for when he then communicates with them. So yeah, I would commend that too. I find it's really interesting. So I had someone else yesterday on another call, and he was a bit of a painful person. And it's very rare that someone is, you know, irritating around ID and a joy in every other part of their life. And when we were debriefing with the leader afterwards, she was like, I'm not surprised at the way he showed up. You know, I mean, that pain that he was for you, making, you know, being difficult around his ID. Honestly, Paul, we experience that in every other conversation we have with this person. And so sometimes they make out like they've just got an issue with, you know, their ID. But it actually, it's what we said, when someone's really out of stride or feeling insecure and things aren't right, it's not just about the ID, it's about how they're doing life. And so, you know, one of the best ways to help people like that is for you just to get in stride and just without, you know, having to say a whole lot to challenge them. I think I've seen people over time, when you exude that joy and that vitality, there comes a point where other people, you know, not everyone, but many people get to a point where they're like, well, I want what you've got. How have you done that? And then's your moment to make a difference. Anyone else?
So I'm not a manager. I'm just a worker bee, and learning other people's IDs is a little overwhelming to me. But what I learned from the last talk that we had was to focus more on my ID. And what this is doing for me is to help me understand myself so that I can communicate in a way that I get the info to do my best at my job. So it's a little different than what you just talked about, but that's helping me in that way.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Tina. And I have a couple of things I want to share back with you that you might just keep in mind as you sort of continue your journey. But before I do, I just want to ask, because you made such a valuable point about the feeling of being overwhelmed, having to think about other people's IDs. And I'm just wondering, is there someone else on the call that has felt like that too, but then it shifted? You know, was that just a stage you went through? Do you still feel or find it somewhat overwhelming? But just so you can maybe, especially if you've got an ID somewhat similar to Tina's, you know, how has that same journey been for you? Is that overwhelming sensation a more permanent thing, or is there something that comes after that? Who would like to share? I'll tell you what I'm referencing maybe while you're thinking. In our certification class, which is a 3-day class, people come in with all this excitement wanting to learn about their ID. I've got you, Karen, and I'll come to you in a second. And after the first day, they're like, man, it's amazing. It's amazing what I'm learning. And they're so excited. And after day 2, they're like, it's overwhelming. There is so much to this. Like, there is so much, and it's really overwhelming. And we're like, just trust, you know, because it doesn't necessarily stay here. You're just at another step in the journey. And as they keep going, other things happen. So I just wanted to know, so Karen, do you want to share what you're going to share and then we'll come back?
Yeah, I noticed that Tina and I have similar IDs, so right. I thought I would chime into that. Yeah, it is overwhelming, and I literally I was first introduced 5 years ago, but have been really immersed in it over the past 10 months. And about a month ago, maybe, it started to not feel so overwhelming. If that makes you feel any better, Tina. And really the strategy that kind of came to me was to not, even though it is about our whole ID, I'm dealing with so many different IDs, and I'm not talking about work related. I'm thinking family, friends, former colleagues, that I focus on their strongest, in trying to understand their drives and their needs. And then I look at mine, and then I kind of keep it to the two of us and how those intermix with one another. But really the building block for me was to just keep my focus on the strongest drives for those people. And now, after a few months of doing that, the whole idea is getting more natural to look at, if you will. Hope that's helpful, Tina.
Thank you.
So that's a great clue for Tina and for everyone, is sometimes if you're in that place where you feel a little overwhelmed, just focusing on their strongest drive as opposed to the whole ID, it simplifies the process. And yes, if you covered the whole ID, you'd be even more sort of masterful with whatever, whether it's the way you approach them or the insights you might give them. But honestly, just pointing them in the direction of their strongest drive or focusing on that, that's a breakthrough. And then as you start to make progress there, you will, like what Karen said, you will start to build your confidence. So Trace, do you want to share? I see you've got your hand up. You're on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Hey there.
I have the same, sorry, Trace, I have the same idea as Tina. The turning point came for me, a funny story. I used to count things. I used to count bricks on walls. I used to count truck tires. And when I found I was doing those sort of things, with my complete drive, I was finding that I was looking for certainty and looking for things to know the information about it. And the turning point came that I found out that this reaction was due to, there was something new happening around me and I didn't know the answer and I didn't know what was going on. So therefore, the turning point came from, hey, look, that's okay. I just need to know the answer. I don't know the answer yet. So being overwhelmed when lots of things were happening, just say, well, I haven't experienced that before. And that was tipping my complete drive wacko, because I needed to know stuff and understanding that I was doing this when there was new stuff going around. So I then just stopped and said, well, what's going on? What's different? What's happening that I haven't noticed before?
Thank you.
And that's how I began to deal with it.
Thank you. So simple and yet really effective. Well done. Thank you. Trace.
So what I was going to say, hi, Tina. I don't know you. I don't know your role or how you're using ID. But one of the things I share with clients a lot is, maybe unpopular opinion, you don't have to be the expert or know everything about ID. And I think with your ID, you want to be the expert and know everything and understand it thoroughly, right? To the nth degree. And I think, I've been doing this almost 25 years and I feel like I still don't fully understand it thoroughly, right? Like listening to Steve just now, I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I can understand why. So we're all still learning. So part of me would say, and then I think about you probably have an expertise in your role in your business and what that looks like. And so I would say, use the resources as much as possible. So like number 7 there, to me, is such a gift, and all of the resources that we have on the platform, because those resources were designed by people who had all the knowledge and experience to then put it into terms that you don't have to think, okay, what is that? But you can look at it and go, okay, how do I use that information to communicate and work with this person?
So now you might tell me, no, you're consulting, and then I'll say, okay, no, you need to become the expert. So I don't really know how your role works. But I would just say use the resources. And the more you use the resources and work with people, the more you'll start to see, especially with your ID, patterns. Okay, this is these kind of people. Okay, these 6 people I work with, it keeps telling me these tips. Okay, and you'll start to see the patterns as you're applying it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trace.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to stories in terms of how you keep the idea alive from a story point of view. What's the story that you draw on to use yourself? Is it something that happened for you from when you first did your ID? Is it as much as it happened today and you just continuously reference stories? What is something that you draw on to keep yourself focused on ID and in stride? And I'll kick it off. I said I would share a story, and I literally just thought of a story, so I'll share it for you. So I was at the gym this morning, so it's literally 3 hours ago. I was at the gym, and I have a trainer, and because the trainer has done his ID, and I gave him a little bit of coaching the other day, he was very thankful. He said to me, "What's your ID?" And I said, "What are you really asking?" And he said, because I mean, for me to say to him 8147 doesn't mean anything to my trainer. I'm like, "What are you really asking?" He said, "Well, now that I understand more about myself, I'm wondering, well, how do am I giving you everything you need to be at your best? Like, what would you want from me to be, for this session to be even better?" I'm like, what a great conversation to have, And I'm like, and then I paused. I was in the middle of doing a workout, and I paused and I said, "I'm thinking." And when I finished, I said, you know what I just did? That's what I told you the other day. Because often when people stop and think, and especially if you're an avoid improviser person, that thinking might go on for a long time because it's the solitude you need to work something through. But people don't know whether you've been, that they pissed you off, whether or not you're disengaged, whether you've moved on. They don't know. And so I just said to him, I'm thinking. And then I kept working out. And then when I finished, it was only 30 seconds later, he said, and I said, "That's what I told you the other day." He said, "That's so helpful because I didn't know what was going on for you in that moment." And I said, "That's how people spend their life with you, And he's like, he just found it really profound. But there's an example as recent as this morning when we're just doing something simple like a workout. But I find when I'm exercising, I have it's like a party in my head of so many conversations that are ID related, because it plays out in everything you do. But I think because when I'm working out, I don't know what you're doing, Jay, but you're scribbling all over my slide. It just plays out all the time. And if you're present to the interactions you're having, either with yourself or with others, you'll actually find really nuanced ID stories all of the time. Like that example for me was something for me, I was to also use with him around showing him what the silence of me thinking about. I need to think for an answer, but the silence could have been really interpreted in a variety of ways. And I did that for 30 seconds. He would do that for a longer period, and it can be really off-putting to the other people in the conversation. It's one of the key things he took away from our conversation a few days back. All right. What about for you? Who's got something they would like to share?
All right, that's too long for me to wait.
Yeah.
You had your chance. My favorite one is a guy from a gig we did where the boss called us in because he was being a guy was being a real pain in the ass for everybody else. And he didn't want to point him out, but he wanted to. I said, "Look, we're just going to set a code for how we're all going to work, and then he'll see himself against the code, and then we'll work from there." And we did the gig, and at the end of it, we were packing up and going, and we went outside. And he was outside having a smoke. The guy who was the troublemaker. And as we're walking by, he goes, "Hey," he goes, "that was terrific. Thanks so much." And I went, "Oh, good, glad." He goes, "You know what though? If I hadn't been such a pain in the ass to everyone, we'd have never had a great session like that." And so I went, "You're right, thank you." Right, and I use that every day in back in my head. Well, not every day, but it's the sense of you never know what gift you're going to give. just do the best you can with what you got, you know. And this guy, he wasn't really bad. No, he just didn't get them and they didn't get him, you know. And the guy said it transformed the place. But the negative part for this for me was, why didn't anyone say anything to him sooner? And I realized that's what they need us for. They just need the language.
Need the language, and they need the safety to, you know, like, I think one of the best things about the ID is because everyone has one, and because there's no one ID better than another, it just creates an equal playing field and a level of awareness that makes it safer and okay to then speak your truth. And obviously for some people, they're going to get to that truth place faster than others. But if someone starts it and shares at a level of vulnerability, it sets the thermostat for that sort of gives permission to other people to then share similarly. So that's a really important piece as well. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for the story. Who else?
I've got one. For me, it's more about the practicalities rather than a specific story. But I try and remain open and curious with the people I'm interacting with, because for me, I'm still new to ID, or newish in applying it on a regular basis, and so if I can just not be both constrained or shut down that inquisitive, okay, well, what is this person either really telling me that I'm not hearing, or how could I be coming across to that person and I'm not aware of it. So for me, it's just the keeping alive part is the remaining curious about it, because I'm always learning.
That's a great point, Tristan, because not only does that help you, but if you think about that, you can use that with everyone, whether they've done their ID or not. And one of the questions that comes up from people is, oh, but what do we do when we don't know someone's ID? This is all great. If you know their ID, you can get, like Tracy said, you get on the platform, you check out what their ID is, you can see how to collaborate with them. But what do you do when you don't know their ID? And so I'm going to come back to you in a second, Tristan. Well, the first thing is get in stride. Make sure that the way you show up is in a place that is you in stride, so your focus is about them, not about you, and you speak with authenticity and vulnerability so that it invites people into that conversation, that space with you. But I want to check in with you, Tristan, on, so what's different now that you can see, or you're doing this staying curious for longer, how is that different to what you did before, and how is that playing out for you? Is it because the reason I'm asking is I get that it makes sense, the logic of it. People go, oh yeah, that's a good thing to do, but does it take you more time? Does it need you to be in a different space yourself? Is it actually frustrating, but one of those things where you go slower to go faster? What actually goes on for you, and explain that part.
Yeah, it actually takes more cycles. So I am not as reactive, which is probably a good thing with my ID as well. It takes a bit of more thought, and it's a different way of interacting with people, which I don't know if it's working or not, but it's put me off kilter, I suppose. I was kind of just a natural leader. I would just gun-ho into everything. If you know anything about my ID, I'm right all the time, and I'm not afraid to take risks. And so it's definitely changed my leadership approach, because I'm actually now considerate of, okay, who are the people that I'm interacting with, and how would that come across to them? Is that what they need? And that's not it's made me less selfish in conversations, for sure. And the effect on the team, I'm still gauging, but it's definitely made me more aware, and I feel that the interactions are more effective. Like, communication is more effective. I have a lot of use Authenticate on the team, where I'm going to avoid Authenticate. So I'm learning a lot about that drive and what does it mean to actually have clarity of communication. And that's especially something that I'm trying to practice.
Yeah, it might just take more time, but I promise you there will be feedback you get, not necessarily explicit feedback by people saying to you, oh, that worked, or that was great, but you'll just notice the change in the quality of your relationships and the impact that you have over time that will make it a hugely worthwhile investment for you. Well done. Greg, you gave...
Joe's got a hand up too, Paul.
Yeah, I got it. Thanks, Ian. Greg, you gave that tip to me years ago of stay dumber for longer. One of the best strategies. I mean, it probably sounds nice to say stay curious for longer, but the dumber bit probably worked well for me. That was just a golden strategy that you can use with everybody, because we saw it earlier today with Takala saying knowledge when she really, the key word really was picture. It's just so important. And it's what I did to develop the ID. That's how I got to what we call level 4 questioning, was just digging deeper to understand what do people really mean when they use those words, and it was getting to that more genuine truth, that whether it was the 4th question or the 14th question, the point was there was a deeper truth most of the time that I was talking to people. All right, Joe.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Trace, you go first. I don't want to sort of...
I just wanted to point out, since the conversation is how we see IDs show up, just now as you're speaking with Tristan, and then so 8147, and you say to Tristan, so just observe, pay attention to that. I'm sure over time you'll notice that things are changing and you'll be able to see, and you're asking him to pick up on things. And Greg's comment in the chat is you could just check in with the people you work with and ask them. Right? Or some version of that. And I think that's just another great example of IDs, just how coming out of us, right? Whether we like it or not, the way that you would check in and the way that Greg would check in is so different.
Thank you, Trace. Yeah, that great example. Thank you. Joe, you had your hand up. You are on mute. Yeah, thanks, Joe.
Yeah, just something fairly simple, but when I'm coaching my clients and I talk about I'm talking to them and sharing with them about their ID, and I explain my ID, and I say to them, especially about my Authenticate drive and also my my improvised drive, because those tend to be, I've all got all strong drives, but I always say to them, and it doesn't matter whether they use Authenticate or whether they're avoid use Authenticate. I talk to them about what I say they can just take as read. They don't have to worry about looking behind the scenes and seeing what I'm meaning. And that just tends to give people a lot of confidence that they don't have to be thinking, what is she really trying to say? Is she got another agenda and she's trying to guide me towards something or ask me a question that she doesn't want to say? So by being really clear, it also really just helps them be clear. And the people that I coach, especially executives and when they're talking about their IDs or when they're looking at theirs and their use Authenticate, our conversations just zero in immediately to what's really important, and we don't faff around with everything that's not. So that makes it really easy. The other thing I also say to them is, my use Authenticate drive, especially for people who avoid Authenticate, improvise, is, I'm likely to come up with 50 different ideas, and don't get overwhelmed by that. It's just a brain dump, and let's talk about anything that captured you or is important or whatever. So I'm always, I guess, by positioning how I respond or how I interact, it just also ups their, it seems to be really effective in upping their awareness of how they are going to respond, either the same or interact or whatever, the same or different depending on their IDs. So by referring to mine, I do it because there's usually got some value in demonstrating to them how they're likely to interact with their team and or otherwise. And I also just, and I'm sure a lot of us do this, use a lot of test cases. I've got a number of people in my client list that are all 7553s. So I don't know why, but I've got quite a few, and they all seem to have a similar way of doing things, and which is obviously not surprising. And just by using other people's the way they respond or the issues or the challenges they have, it just helps people sort of have that space to think about how they do it and whether there's anything there that reverberates or that they can identify with. So I just find those are some helpful things. And that's one of the ways that I'm always using my ID pretty much all the time.
Another great example, Joe, so simple, but really, I hadn't thought of it before to express it the way you did, but what I heard you say was basically share your ID. Just tell them, well, this is, you know, I'm just thinking it's as simple as me saying to someone, well, you know, I'm a strong verifier, so I'm asking these questions because I need to know, not because I don't trust you. You know, just using it like that, so it helps people then react to you, or you using the, well, I have lots of ideas, so, you know, don't think all of them are going to work, but it's me to sort of come up with these ideas. Just explaining yourself to others not only helps them understand and interpret you and not misinterpret you, but it sort of gives them permission to then share back with you something similar about themselves and get on that wavelength with you. So great, another great example. I'll add these, you know, strategies you guys are sharing today. I'll add them onto this slide so that we've got, we've captured them as well for you. All right, I'm going to come back to the stories. So Tracy, you said before you've been doing this for 25 years. Long time. How do you
I was 12, Paul, since I was 12.
Pretty much. So how do you keep it alive? What I'm sure everyone's curious to know, well, what do you do? I mean, we had Tina say before it's that she's new to it. It's a bit overwhelming. I'm going to come back to Tina for a different reason in a minute, but you're, you know, a long way down the track using ID. Are they stories from ages ago? Are they stories that occur, you know, every day? Is there something in particular that you use to keep it front of mind in how you use it yourself, but how you use it with others as well?
So I think the first answer is, you know, where we started this conversation about being at your best. So I think answer number one is using it for yourself, knowing what you need to be at your best, knowing what pulls you off track, knowing what stresses you out, and being able to have strategies to manage that. But even have strategies to leverage your talents and manage your vulnerabilities, know where your zone of genius is versus just things you might be good at. So I think it's self-awareness is probably the number one, and paying attention to where I'm at. Because that's really at the end of the day all we can control. And then I think there's a million stories, right? I think I use it with every client in every conversation. I don't necessarily say because you're use verify or use authenticate. It's more just using the language of ID without saying the language of ID, especially with people who aren't as experienced in ID. I think it's stories every day. And I think one of the biggest gifts is just knowing people are different. You know, I'll never forget a workshop I ran at the Crown Plaza, 23 years ago, when we were kind of talking, when we were going around talking about everyone's ID, and I shared, it was someone like Steve. And I said, for you to be at your best, you need to feel on top of things, have things under control, have everything running like clockwork. Someone across the room was like, doesn't everyone need that? You know, and it was this whole dialogue of like, someone else goes, no, gosh, no, I need this over here. And it happens, I'd say weekly, where I'm talking to someone and I share something about their ID and they say, of course, doesn't everyone need that? And I have to pull up somebody opposite on the platform and say, no, look at this person. And they say, oh my gosh. So I think one of the biggest gifts is realizing we're all just different, right? No one's right or wrong or good or bad or better or worse than, but if people can just realize and we're all different, and that whole assume positive intent, I feel like that's a huge gift. And I think last of all, there's stories all the time. I was telling Patricia today, I have 3 teenage daughters. They're all improvisers. First day of school today, no matter how much, and my husband and I also improvise, 2 incomplete and use improvise. So we basically have some fun around here, except for my one completer daughter who's also improvised. Anyway, it was a complete mess this morning. It did not matter how much we planned in advance, like get your clothes out, get this prepared. It was a mess. We were all late. Everyone was late. Nobody liked their outfit the day of that they had picked out the day before. It was all so improvised, right? And so just knowing that allowed me to be like, okay, I'm not going to yell at anyone for not being ready or waiting to the last minute or changing things. It's just like, all right, this is going to happen. So now we get to have them come home from school and say, hey, girls, what do we learn? How are we going to do that differently for the rest of the school year? Because that didn't work. Okay, so that was a lot of stuff, Paul. Hopefully something in there was useful to someone about how I use and been using it.
Well,
it was useful for a giggle as well.
I think a lot of us can relate, whether it's about the kids or whether it's ourselves, you know, where you have the best of intentions to be organized and, you know, whatever. And then invariably, even when you're organized, things change, you know, like I know, I mean, we getting off on a trip on Monday and Susie said to me, you probably haven't started packing yet like I did, like I have. And yet if I did start packing and I thought I was all organized, an hour before I was going to leave, I'd probably change everything anyway. And
absolutely,
you know, back to the chaos. So the instincts just play out all the time. Trace, you're just masterful with how, not just what you do, but how you share it. And there's, you know, plenty of gold in that, including just never underestimate the effect that you being in stride has on other people. You know,
Yeah.
It's not always what you say or what you do, it's who you are. And when there is an energy, and I think as you get maybe not older, but wiser and more in tune with, you know, in stride versus out of stride, there is a vibration that comes through when you're in stride that just impacts people, and trusting that, you know, more so than that sense of I've got to get it right, you know, or I've got to know all this stuff to do it. Just know yourself and be true to yourself, be in stride with yourself, and share the stories about yourself, like what Tracy just did, because it does let you put the fun side into what for a lot of other people would be incredibly stressful, because you've got a healthier perspective on why those things are happening.
And the other thing is she's in stride. So if she wasn't in stride, she may not have handled it as gracefully as she did this morning.
It was about as graceful as a quarterback through a china shop. Let's just be honest.
All right, so we've got a couple of minutes to go, and I've been sitting here feeling like I would be playing small if I didn't call something out today for you, Tina, when you introduced yourself at the very beginning and you said, I'm just a worker bee. And it's been sitting on my mind and on my heart the whole time. And in fact, at times when I've thought about it, I've actually been really emotional about it. And the reason I call it out is because when you use the word just, and on the contrary, your ID, its strength is being the worker bee. You know, like your ID is the one that churns through volumes of work, and people look at you and go, how do you get so much done? You know? And so I know it's you to not be self-promoting, but you can at least not be unnecessarily self-deprecating. And just removing the word just from the way you describe yourself gives the space for your strengths to really be truer about you. And I would say embrace the fact that it's not even, maybe worker bee is a fine phrase, but please know, if you haven't seen this already from your ID, you are just, your productivity and the volume of what you can get through has a lot of people in awe. And therefore it's far from being just a worker bee. It's whatever the opposite of that is who you really are. And I just wanted to call out, given that you're new to it, the impact of that word just. It's a really short word.
I thank you for that. One of the reasons why I'm happy being a worker bee, one of the reasons I use just is I don't want them to think anymore than that. It's like, at this point in my life, I want to be the worker bee. I don't want to be in charge. I don't want to, so I don't mean it to be self-deprecating. I just mean it to be,
it's not even
what you
don't
want.
make me have more than that right now.
So it's what you could say that would land really positively, and it's not even self-deprecating, it's sort of shrinking of you. If you just say, I'm the worker bee and I thrive on being the worker bee.
Yes, I want to be the helper. I want to be who you come to get something done, but I don't want to be in charge of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. But thank you for that. I'll use my words differently.
Well, I just wanted you to hopefully be something you can take away. But we're at the top of the hour, guys. Thank you so much for being on the call today. Fabulous call, great sharings. Thanks for all the contributions. I know it's been really helpful, and have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you again on our next webinar. Take care, everyone.